Oh, okay.
I am reading
Hey, Vicky.
that's all.
All right, so let's call the workshop meeting to order. Let Vicky get settled. And again, just for the public, remember this is a workshop meeting for the planning board to work with the consultants. And you might have some input from the applicant, but we will not be soliciting comments from the public today. So, but of course, our meetings are all open and you're obviously welcome to meet here and witness and listen. And we did get anyone who sent any letters, and they'll be added to the commentary file shortly. That's an workshop. So what did we decide, Frank and Warren? Would you want it? Who was going first?
That perhaps I'll go through
Right.
special permit issues just for discussion with you, and then George would go through the site plan
Excellent.
issues. So on special permit, you've all got sort of a memo from the because everybody we're going to have it, and Tricia has a few copies of this, and I have a. By the way, what this is just some talking points for you, just to highlight it. Wanted to go over special permit procedures under state law because that had come up, and what is a special permit? How's it treated under town law here in Client Crimes? And then relationship. I think it's a question when I was listening, on Zoom at the last meeting. I think there was a question about relationship to seeker between the special permit and seeker. And so I wanted to cover that. And then I have as a separate handout when we get to it, our memo that we sent to you back on September 7th. And that's divided up into two sections, the special permit objectives. And then we had suggested 19 conditions to the special permit. And we wanted to discuss those with you because if there's anything else that should be added, we should do it prior to your next, prior to the October meeting. So. But anyway, what's the second page is on the item of what are special permits, and this is out of the state town law, so it just goes through, the special permit, and this relates to planning board and your board. I just thought it'd be good to see it because first thing we always do in our office when dealing with something. Is what is the actual law, and this is out of the town law, and it just says a special use permit should mean the authorization of particular land use, which is permitted in the zoning ordinance. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. That special permit actually is a permitted use, subject to that is standards or objectives of the permit, and then. What it goes on to say is subject to the requirements imposed by the zoning code or local law to ensure that the proposed use is in harmony with the zoning ordinance and local law will not adversely affect the neighborhood if such requirements are met. So that's why we have in our memo, which I know you all have, but I have copies later, why we added the 19 conditions, because we thought those conditions was taken out of the past 6 months of your review of this under seeker, and then the applicant responded, and those conditions are all things that the applicant promised under seeker. And so that's the approval of special use permits. In this case, item 2 there, the town board has given you, the planning board, the right to review special permits. So that's the that's the conditions. And then if you turn the page, you see the special permits under Pine Plains ordinance. And by the way, it tracks, as it should, it tracks the state law, as you would expect. And then it says at the end, which I think is, I highlighted in yellow there, I hope it came out. When we go to copy that last sentence, B, just says, in authorizing the issuance of special use permit, the board shall take into consideration public health, safety, and welfare, and shall prescribe appropriate conditions and safeguards to ensure accomplishment of the following objectives. So that's the actual language of your special permit. So then you have 11 objectives. And it's clear, though, what I wanted to make clear was that you can put in, prescribed is the word, appropriate conditions to make sure that each objective is met. So I think that's an important issue. And then I attached at the end of this just something. This is not to play attorney here at all. But I happen to have a law professor whose name was John Armentano. By the way, I just happened to be one of the professor's issues in planning. And he wrote this article for the New York Law Journal, but John wrote it in 1996. So he's from Long Island. I want to get some unbiased source. Nothing that could be tracked to anybody here or just an unbiased source. What is a special exception permit? Now, he called it special exceptions. That's another word for a special permit. And he basically tracks the same law, but he just gives you all the standards of special permit. And so I wanted to just have that, for discussion. Now I looked in your ordinance also. You have over 20 special permit listings in your current ordinance. And about 15 of them or so, they have special conditions that apply to the special permit. For instance, you've got elder cottage, automobile repair, camp, a cemetery, timber harvesting, daycare center, but importantly, you have public utilities, and that would include the Central Hudson electrical substation. So you've got things like that, and you already have over 20 special permits. These are type of special permits, for instance, for a school. I want to say, I think if you look at your own code, someone said that, gee, the mere juxtaposition of something that's different from agriculture makes it, incompatible. I don't think that's supported in your own code. I mean, one could say a school is different than a rural or agricultural area, yet that type of thing is normal in most codes we work with as special permits. And of course, something like a school or actually a church is special permit. Some codes, not in yours. Yours, it's a permitted use. But the point is that you can't have the juxtaposition of two things, and they can be deemed compatible. And your code assumes that these things are all subject to a special permit. They're all permitted uses in a rural area. So it's not just that this is something new. It's treated as, and by the way, it's treated in your code. I want to give some credit to the committee that wrote the solar code here, because I asked the committee, we gave them a choice. We said state law, the state model solar legislation does not make a tier 3 solar facility such as this a special permit. The committee, we recommended, let's make it a special permit to give the planning board the maximum control over the conditions you want to put on. And as I mentioned to you in Saturday session, that the one good thing to me about the special permit is that everything that the applicant is, in response to your seeker questions, everything the applicants put forth, we agreed to, we're now trying to make a condition of special permit. So I just wanted to bring that out. And then item 4 here is the relationship between seeker and the special permit. We've faced this issue in numerous communities. I'll defer to Warren on all of this now. But in the other communities we worked in, and someone said at your last meeting, tonight's discussion should not be, this is not Seeker 2.0. At your last meeting, that's right. It's not Seeker 2.0. I brought with me the whole Seeker part 1, 2, 3 that you did. And as you know, over time, in the 4 to 5 months we were going through the part 2 of the EAF, we had checked off originally 5 sort of large categories. And as things came in and the applicant responded, those came down to like 2. And the 2 were on neighborhood aesthetics and then neighborhood community character. And as a result of more studies that were done, more conditions, more things that the applicant offered, you narrowed that down and said, those can be, those do not rise to a level of significant adverse impact. Well, where you have an overlap between seeker and your special permit, most of the advice we've seen in other towns from other planners as well as our own firm, if you've made a seeker determination already on aesthetics, but you've made a seeker determination on compatibility, neighborhood community compatibility, that is your determination. And you don't have to make, I think you don't have to spend a detailed amount of time on that. And when you look at the special permit requirement, because you already studied that. Now, I realized from listening at the last meeting that many people or some people would disagree with your determination on seeker. Nevertheless, we made the determination and other people would agree. But it doesn't have to be, I would just quote here, this is not seeker 2.0. Now, the commentator who made that, I don't think it meant it the way I'm taking it. But what I'm saying is, he's right. This is not seeker 2.0. You don't have to go back on seeker. You can rely on your judgment that you made on seeker, where it overlaps with an objective, one of the 11 objectives for a special permit. However, in some codes, and I just saw this recently in Westchester County, a board looked at its special permit criteria, and some of them did not overlap with the seeker determination. They made a negative declaration on seeker, and they said, well, wait a minute, here's 2 or 3. We need to discuss this, in some detail. But in other words, if seeker has handled something, I think you've handled it. You got to make sure that the conditions that you put on a special permit are appropriate and carry out the intent of seeker. But I wanted to make that determination. If the negative declaration has covered something and you've taken a hard look at it, you can reiterate that hard look in your special permit. So I just wanted to give this brief overview because then leads to it then leads to this I just made copies. I know you all have this, but I thought I'd just hand out the hard copies of it. George, I think you have this, but I if you want. And Warren, you have this.
I have it.
You have. That's good. Here we go.
Could I have this, please?
Okay. So
Just can't say just
Hey,
Steve.
Warren, what do you think? It's sure.
Could I have one?
We're discussing that.
No, that's,
Oh, sorry.
no, that's a good Steve.
Oh, that goes to
Steve.
okay. Good. Good.
No.
Yeah, the answer. There we go.
Did you get Steve, yeah, both.
Anybody?
All right, great.
You probably got 2 of that. There you go. Okay,
Just
so
to clarify something on giving out this document, the freedom of information law prescribes when the document becomes public for purposes of foiling the document to the public. This document, when it was mentioned by Frank at the last meeting, was not made public. It was sent confidentially to the board members, and that's called an intra-agency communication, which is exempt from FOIL. So until such time as the document is actually presented and discussed publicly and laid on the table, it is not subject to FOIL. So we were not allowing the public to see this document until tonight, when it's been laid on the table and made public. And that's the reason why we didn't respond to the FOIL request.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You have
another one?
More? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, Francis. Did we give one to Andrew?
I got plenty of them.
I haven't seen them yet. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Can you get that? Yes, yeah, that one. Yeah, sure. It's not.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, all right. Yeah, this is it. Got it. Check. So anyway, here's the memo, which planning board, you got, but I wanted to just go over it for public discussion with board, that it's broken into two parts. So and it's broken into two parts. I wanted to give you that preface because that's what state law suggests. In other words, what are the objectives of the special permit, or the standards of the special permit? And they go through, as you can see here, if you just go through it, there's basically 11 of them. 11 general special permit. By the way, these are just your general criteria that are in the code. Certain other things like restaurant in the code and other special permits sometimes have very specific conditions. To me, the solar farm does not, because the zoning code is very specific and they had to meet the zoning. So these are your general 11 criteria.
And does that have any significance that there's no specific special use criteria, Warren?
Well, there actually are special use criteria. There's a difference between special use criteria and special use permit objectives. In the zoning code, we have the solar law. Not every use in our code that's permitted or specially permitted has a standalone local law. For those uses, there are what we call supplementary regulations. So there's a list of uses that don't have a standalone law like this, in which the actual criteria for the issuance of the special use permit are spelled out. Those you have to comply with. So the criteria for a solar special use are actually set forth in the solar law, which is part of our code. And they are all the factors which we reviewed in the environmental review and have been reviewing in the application that's been submitted. I can go over them with you, but these are actually the criteria that it's your ultimate decision to make. You have to decide whether the criteria in our solar law have been met. And they include the visual impact study, proposed lighting, site security, grading, clearing of vegetation for impact to rural character, farm structures and ridge lines. Planning board may require the installation to be screened when viewed from the roads. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No, that's
or public spaces, and may require that utilities be buried underground. Applicants must submit a property operation and maintenance plan during site plan approval. Such plans shall describe continuing photovoltaic maintenance and property upkeep, such as mowing and trimming. Preservation of agricultural lands and natural vegetation and habitat. The applicant must show how agricultural land, prime agricultural soils, natural vegetation and habitat are preserved to the greatest extent possible. And the impacts to these resources should be minimized. Solar energy, Pine Plains recognizes that solar energy systems can be designed and installed in a manner that allows the land underneath solar panels and near the solar installations to be used for agricultural purposes. Planning board may grant greater flexibility to applicants who propose installations where agricultural operations would occur jointly with the production of solar energy, as in the case of this application. Planning board may retain one or more consultants to assist with the review of the application. There's a provision on maximum lot coverage. Parcels with an area of less than 70 acres shall have a maximum lot coverage of 20%. 70 acres or greater can have a maximum lot coverage of 30%. As a provision on glare, all solar panels shall have anti-reflective coating. Catastrophic weather events. In the event of catastrophic weather event, the planning board may review an in-kind reconstruction of the solar energy system in an expedited manner. So if something happens to the facility and they have to come back to rebuild it, you would have an expedited review. And then there must be a decommissioning plan, which has been submitted to the board, and a description of the security that's going to be provided for the facility, such as fencing and things like that. There is a requirement of a bond that has to be posted to ensure the decommissioning plan, and the description of how the bond is determined is in our law. And in those are in fact the criteria. You have to judge for yourself. I think that all those criteria have been met, through the process that we've gone through. And if they fail to provide one or more of those criteria, that could be a problem for the applicant. But those have been provided. Now, when
So
we
they're
get-
kind of interwoven into the section allowing solar in general, as opposed to sectioned out under special use, like what
There
is
is-
daycare and schools and
Yeah,
all those
so
things.
all of that criteria are in our code, and as we've been laboring over that for months and months and months. What you have in your special use permit, and Frank mentioned this, I just want to emphasize, these things that are listed in 275-55B are not criteria, they are objectives. And what it says in the law, just so you understand, on application after public notice and hearing, the planning board may authorize by resolution the issuance of a special use permit exclusively for uses that require such a permit under the zoning law. In authorizing the issuance of special use permit, the board shall take into consideration the public health, safety, and welfare, and shall prescribe appropriate conditions and safeguards to ensure accomplishment of the following objectives. And those are the objectives. So the way that our statute is written, these are objectives that you want to meet in any special use permit. And if they can't, they're not met totally, you're enabled to prescribe conditions for that use. We couldn't do that in the seeker review. We didn't remember we talked about not prescribing a conditional negative declaration. You couldn't do that, but you can in the special permit when you're considering whether these objectives are met. So I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm glad you did.
Technically, I interrupted, but
By the way, that leads perfectly then to if you turn in this memo that I just gave you to the last page. This is just for me, the last page of the memo is just a list of special permit conditions. And we wanted to cover conditions. And by the way, this doesn't mean to be this is for discussion with, in other words, I just picked up that Warren just mentioned something that I thought of, but it's in the zoning code. That's a bond.
Right.
Or
That's what I'm gonna add.
so there's some financial things here that we went through the 11 objectives of the special permit and said, okay, well, what can the special conditions be? Because the rationale behind the conditions is, well, twofold. I think in my mind, it's to make sure that, if the special permit condition is not met, that's enforceable by your building department. So it gives you, I think gives you just a little bit more leverage than seeker itself. And so these are things we thought of. I don't mean to say this is an absolutely complete list, but we listed 19 things that, by the way, on the very first one, the applicant shall construct the project in accordance with the June 5th site plan. I would right away now say site plan. as amended. You know, if it becomes amended because George had, I think, 4 or 5 points on the site plan, which if I read the applicant's latest submission up here, they've agreed to. But I think then it should say as amended, such and such
Mhm.
date. So.
What was the what was the latest amendment to the site plan? Do you have the date?
Yeah, I believe June 5th is the right date you have here. Bardon, if you can hear us, you could confirm the date, that'd be great.
It's in his memo, okay, because when if you issue the special use permit and the conditions, I'm gonna have to write them up, so they're gonna be a little bit more detailed than in the list.
But there's some changes to be made though, or have they been made?
They're going to be made.
Okay.
The applicant, I read something anyway, and I think there's hard copies from the applicant here. They agreed to George's, all of George's, I don't want to speak.
Yeah, they did.
They agreed to all of George's comments.
And that's this?
It's the top one, sorry.
No,
Oh, no, maybe there's that one. I think it's that, that one. If you hand that out, Dave, like it should figure it. If I read my email correctly.
Yeah.
The applicants agreed to the conditions that
so when we get to the site plan, we'll discuss those amendments.
discuss those. So. But item.
Do we have enough?
I haven't.
Yeah. And Steve, is there one for Steve?
Because as Warren said, maybe we'll leave site plan to the end and then for sure go through those. But item 2 on our, so item 1 was the applicant shall construct the project in accordance with the site plan dated. And I will have to put as amended. But item 2 is to provide a perpetual conservation easement for the entire site, and that's been agreed to. And that easement, I'm not sure, I'll have to defer because I saw a letter from Scenic Hudson saying that they would be involved in that.
Right. I'm gonna probably specifically mention, if I draft a condition, that it'll be held by, the conservation easement would be held by Scenic Hudson. Because they, in their last letter, they committed themselves to providing that, if special use permit was granted. And I'm gonna want to see that conservation easement and approve it. So we'll have language in there about that.
Should there be any thought about what happens if the farmer who's renting his fields doesn't want it anymore? And nobody wants to use his agricultural land? What's the obligation of Scenic Hudson in that scenario?
Are you asking the question?
I'm asking it to everyone.
Oh,
Yeah.
conservation easements are perpetual, so they run with the land. They wouldn't change unless they're amended. So if they want to change any of the uses, it's very difficult to do. They would have to go back, the property owner would have to go back to Scenic Hudson. And I'm gonna have a requirement that if there are any amendments to the conservation easement, that has to be approved by the town board, by the planning.
I guess my thought was, what if Scenic Hudson said, well, we should replace that 26 acres of trees that got cut down and take one of these cornfields and put 26 acres of horse. Could they do that?
Yeah, each conservation easement is a little bit different. So I'll have to see that conservation easement document and approve it. And when I do that, I'll provide that to you. So you'll have a chance to review it, make sure the terms are acceptable. They're quite complex.
But I mean, it couldn't be developed, right? So it eventually, if they left it fallow, it'll
go fallow
then eventually just grow into
or
what's there, but-
jump ahead. I'm gonna
Yeah,
suggest
I
that
think
maybe
you'll be,
the applicant think about that as a mitigation for cutting trees.
they're very restricted conservation and what you can do with the property.
Andrew, you had a question?
Yes, just to clarify, Scenic Hudson won't be in control of the property, that there'll be restrictions on the property that includes everything that we committed to in the conservation plan, which we previously submitted. So 70 remaining forested acres will be protected as forested acres. They couldn't be cleared and converted to agricultural lands, but it wouldn't be at Scenic Hudson's discretion of what to do with, remaining ag field, although we have been
Right.
talking to other farmers, it's like, you continue to be leased out. There'd be no other practical use of that area. But I wanted to clarify. I do want to point out, and I think we've talked about this before. We've been working with Scenic Hudson. Obviously, they've been involved and have commented. That's a good faith effort. And there's no ability for us to actually sign anything with Scenic Hudson until after the project is fully approved. So it's just keeping that in mind. One, I think the language that Frank had included as a condition of approval, a conservation easement as described in the conservation plan, is great. And let's say Scenic Hudson wakes up after the approval and decides they no longer want to work with this project or go forward. We would still need a way to satisfy the condition. That could be a conservation easement with another agency or just a deed restriction of the property, putting on restricted covenants that align with the conservation plan. But I did want to flag that.
Warren, that sounds right to you.
That sounds right. I mean, there's a possibility that they may not come to terms with the property owner, and they don't control the actual use of the property. They have restrictions on the use of the property. So, for example, they wanted to take 2 acres and put up a cell tower. That would not be permitted. Those are the normal restrictions you would see in the conservation easement. So if it's not with Scenic Hudson, I'm going to want to make sure it's with another reputable.
And any agreement you would review for things like that,
I
right? To
would
make sure,
I've reviewed them for clients many times.
Well, the third one's more straightforward.
Sorry.
The applicant will receive a variance from the Pine Plain Zoning Board of Appeals with a 7-foot perimeter fence. I think the one that's allowed in the code is, correct me, I think it's 6 feet.
6.
And so the only reason for that is to meet the National Electrical Code. We've run into this before where most, zoning we write ourselves. We don't want a fence much higher than 6 feet. I think 6 feet is good. So this is, by the way, this is specifically in the handout I gave you originally, just for discussion points. You'll see that state law was actually changed in special permits sometime in the 1990s to actually allow for the Zoning Board of Appeals to grant variances, and it's right in the law. And it's in your law. So this is all possible, and it's just making sure that, hey, the Zoning Board of Appeals does, or if you approve the special permit, then it's got to be subject to the ZBA, acting on this.
Didn't they?
They did.
They already
Yeah,
have.
they did. So this is academic.
I'm not sure that I ever got a copy of that. So can you make sure that I want to incorporate the language? But they were granted the variance.
Good. We could take this as a condition then out, because if they've approved it, then I think you no longer need condition 3.
Yeah, I'll put it in.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah.
I see the variance.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And then 4 is again, the project shall be designed in accordance with New York State Fire Code, ensure accessibility of EMS vehicles. That's got to be done anyway. In any case, but we're putting it in just as a safeguard. And
And
then
I think the record does contain a sign off by the fire department.
Yeah.
Well, most of the things in here are things that, these conditions are all things that have been submitted
that's right.
and in the plan.
That's right. All we wanted to do, I kept saying this at those Saturday meetings, that I like to see it as outright conditions to the special permit, which is enforceable here by the town, and it's clear what the applicant's obligations are. And in this case, they've submitted documentation, they've agreed to it, but this is a listing of making sure we've got everything.
Not to say we shouldn't keep going, but I just want to point
By the
that out.
way, we may not, I could go faster here because.
No, it's fine. No. This is why we're here.
Yeah, and then, 5 is, again, this is the SWIP. And so we're making sure that the SWIP is part of this as a condition.
Has that already been
That's
signed off on?
That's George.
Yeah, that's all then.
Yeah, okay. So, all right. And then 6 is, incorporation of erosion control measures pursuant to DEC. And I believe they've agreed to that, but we just wanted to list it as something that is the condition.
Just a point of clarification, most of these things, the applicant, if not all, voluntarily changed the plan during the seeker review process. We didn't mandate those things. So it's clear that these are things that were desirable, and then the applicant responded by amending their plan.
Yeah, the same with 7, the applicant shall limit tree clearing activities between November 1 and March 31. This again is something our understanding is they agreed to, and we're putting it in as a condition. And then the applicant shall, in number 8, construct a wildlife friendly fence shown on the site plan to allow small mammals, insects, other species to freely travel through. That was discussed as part of the seeker, and this is not new. Again, we're just taking something that they heard and then they responded to it and agreed to it. So all of these are things that were developed during seeker, but we're now making them conditional.
Yeah, it's like not a chain link fence, right? The fence we saw on the picture, right? With
Yeah.
It was like a black-
Cultural style, so it's wooden posts and the fencing's a little bit bigger with the gap at the bottom. So it's on the site plan.
9 is the bat boxes, which were discussed to be shown on the site plan. And then 10 is supplemental vegetation screening to the existing forested areas to minimize visual impacts. This is kind of an important one, right? This will make sure that this is done in force. 11, you can see is the noise, and these the hours for operation. Sort of 8 a.m. to 6, Monday through Saturday, which precludes Sunday. And then 12 is the tree disposal plan, which requires best practices in accordance with tree service. So that's 12, and then 13 is again no herbicides or pesticides should be used in the operation of the project. Then 14 is the whole construction mitigation for agricultural lands, which will require an environmental monitor, and that was agreed to in seeker. So we're putting it in here, and then it describes the individual and responsibilities. And this is not an unusual thing for we've run into in other towns too, in terms of environmental monitoring, sure that all of these requirements are followed in terms of environmental issues. And then 15 is operation and maintenance plan, which was submitted to you all, and the decommissioning plan. So that this is saying condition of the special permit is compliance by the applicant.
The date on that said the decommissioning plan dated November 21st, 2020.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's, I think the date's wrong.
I'm sorry, what?
The date is wrong. and then I-
The dates are, the date, the date's wrong, that's the next month. Next month. It's,
We'll have to go back to.
I'll check that date. Sorry.
There was also something in
Nice
in the
catch there.
February 8th, the first February 8th maintenance plan. It says sheep are also used on some sites and graze from June to September. I thought we were specifically told that we weren't gonna have any grazing on this property.
Where do you have that?
It's in that memo, the maintenance plan of February 8th. Jump right out.
Oh, I'm sorry, could you?
It says sheep are also used on some site and graze from June to
Oh,
September.
yeah, there was an article recently, I think it was in the Poughkeepsie Journal.
It's in there, it's in the operation and maintenance plan. I'm not sure that it was meant to be in there, but it's there.
Oh,
what was that?
Enforce it, we can ask her to bring sheep.
Well, it could be, maybe.
Yeah.
that certainly is a lot, I don't know what your plans are, but I think the idea is that sometimes it's difficult to mow underneath those, and sheep farmers have now found that they have another business in having their sheep graze on solar projects. So you might, we'll mention something about that. We're not going to mandate it, but we'll share something.
But if it's in there already, right? This is their plan, right? Right, you're reading it.
Yeah, so
So it says maybe.
Maybe,
Something
right?
like that.
This is the operations manual that the Nexamp provides, and they do with other sites where they do the sheep grazing. I think it's still relatively new and maybe not always cost effective, but.
Are they tall enough? Is the height?
Yeah, is there construction different in places that allow the sheep grazing?
No.
It's not like you need the tall ones, but
Maybe in the future, that's something that would be possible. I think for this project, we changed the seed mix, we intentionally have a native pollinator friendly. Seed mix we planted underneath the panels. I think right now it's not the plan to deploy sheep grazing, but. Possibly in the
for the
future.
sheep.
Yeah. Deploy the sheep.
If you get tired of trying to mow those things, you may turn to sheep.
Yeah, if the guy with the weed whacker gets a little tired, maybe he brings his sheep.
Let's say I found a Poughkeepsie Journal article a bit, between sheep, pigs. I was wondering if that article was written. I was wondering if that article was written sort of in jest. So I'm sure, like, pigs are always gonna win. But
They're special pig.
they're special. But anyway, 16 is again, the applicant must apply for and receive a commercial access highway work permit, which they would have to do, but we would put it in as a condition, they agreed to it. Then anti-glare was mentioned earlier, and you had asked for this. That's item 17, anti-glare coating on all of the solar panels. And then 18 is the solar special use contingent on planning board approval of the site plan, as we said. That's a little bit redundant of item 1. See, so we may not need 18. And 19 is no change shall be made on the project site to add an improvement or change of footprint or location of any improvement shown on the site plan, unless they come back to the planning board for approval. So that was, I think, good to have in. And now I heard we'll renumber this.
Yeah.
But an additional one I heard tonight from Warren, and that's bonding. A bonding provision.
I've already gotten documentation on the bonding. I haven't seen the bonding, but it'll have to be approved if they're going bonded. Well, if that's what they're choosing to do, bonding. Then I'm gonna want to see the bond.
And there was some provision in that it's reviewed and increased reviewed every few years to make sure it's in.
We always review those bonds on a periodic basis to make sure that. In fact, I can put that in, that the board will have the power to on a periodic basis to review the amount of the bond to make sure that it's consistent with.
I think the decommissioning plan hadn't been for it after 5 years, I believe.
5 years. That's probably a sensible.
That's
Uh,
What would be the alternative to bonding?
It's in the code, actually. They could agree to allow us to put a lien on the property if they don't comply with the removal. But and I've spoken to Carson Powers about that, and they were pretty committed to the bonding route. Some solar developers don't like that. But Carson Powers has agreed. I'd much rather have a bond.
Yeah, that sounds better.
You know,
Yeah, bond is money you're holding.
Back to that pollinator, did it mention beekeeping also in that section with the sheep? Are you gonna try to get beekeepers if possible, kind of thing?
Not in the.
It's not in the plan.
Like you said, I know the pollinators in the plane, we needed one of these.
You mentioned the pilot.
I'm sorry, no, I went backwards. Warren, you finished, you have another condition? Sorry.
That there has to be a pilot agreement signed with the town. I'll put language in there to that. I can't guarantee you that I won't think of other conditions as I go through everything. I'll discuss it with BFJ and if I add anything. So I'm depending on, the guidance you give us tonight, I could have it ready by the meeting scheduled for July, or we can do the public hearing and then have it thereafter. I think we thought maybe when we hear the public. I don't want to belabor and torture you guys too much, but I think it might make sense depending on what we hear at the next public hearing. To defer in case something new comes up that we hadn't thought about that we want to consider.
And the pilot is not anything we have to do.
No, you don't get involved in that.
Town board?
I do that with the town board and we've already gotten an offer that I reviewed. So we should be able to wrap that up fairly, hopefully expeditiously. And then the other issues for sure are the ones that were identified by our engineer, who's here with us tonight, George. Maybe he could review those, and it's my understanding that the applicant has agreed to all of those. Some of them will be conditions in the changes to the site plan and conditions in any special that's issued.
I have one question back on 14. Sorry to go back again.
Yes, no, yep.
So it talks about the agricultural monitor, but who monitors the forest? Like, to make sure they're not cutting too much and like all that.
That's holding the, I mean, we can do that. The building department can do it. I think, Drew had said he might want me to come out and assist him with that.
So we're gonna,
So during.
so is that somewhere that that's just in the plan, or where is that?
Right now, we've called that the environmental, on 14, we've just like called that the environmental monitor. By the way, that would have to be agreed to, but in fact, the environmental monitor could end up paying yourself.
Could end up.
So but that's talking about agricultural but I'm talking about the forestry section, like, that they're not cutting trees out. Yes,
Yeah.
Well, Andrew's rich.
Drew will
Right.
enforce the forestry aspects of
Like during construction, right, it's just like any other project.
Right.
The building department that does code enforcement to make sure they comply with the code, the conditions you come up with, the plans that are created. And if he needs assistance with that, which is like any other thing, he can ask me or any other consultant.
And I think he indicated that he probably
Right.
would need.
After that, moving forward, the
Okay.
holder of the easement is going to,
Okay,
I mean, again, they're.
so that's not something we need to
anyone
mention
who has a
in
conservation
condition.
is not a problem.
think about it.
Okay.
I may want to mention that.
Yeah. Mess with it.
How it developed.
Andrew, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna just suggest that, so let's say we go forward with Scenic Hudson, we would pay into a fund when they take the easement. And then they would periodically come on site to monitor compliance with the easement, which would mean the protection of the 70 forested acres. Which is detailed on the conservation plan that we previously submitted.
I
They
know
do that, I think,
DLC
yearly.
does it, yeah.
Yeah.
They send a.
And they
letter
charge-
whenever you got one
They
correct.
charge you for
They
that.
do.
Yeah, and you can't just decide you're gonna cut down
Hefty fee.
2, 3, 15 acres and plant crops. Nope. I know farmers that have tried it. Nope. This is the easement. That's the woods. Yeah, it's forest. Yeah, it's not open for interpretation, but.
Is all the forest marked ahead of time before they start cutting anything? I'm assuming it
how
must
it's
be
done.
somehow,
Yeah,
right?
that's how it's done.
A surveyor
Usually
or-
Surveyors come out and mark it and say, okay, here's your limits of disturbance.
That way, not that
Yeah,
way.
stay out of here. These trees get cut, your fence goes here. That's typically all these things go down.
And I think it's in their plan, but I will put something in there about if any of the screening that they're planted dies or is destroyed, that they'll have an obligation to replant that.
How often will that be monitored? I mean, as far as, they say they're gonna replant it, but is it reviewed on an annual basis? Or, they plant all these nice screenings, but
You mean the town? I mean, monitoring by our zoning enforcement officer would be as much. I would recommend that he, maybe go out at least once a year,
Right.
examine the site, make sure everything, that would be normal in a project like this.
Right.
And let us know if there's any problem. Sometimes that you respond to complaints, neighbors may say, oh, they seem to be violating their forestry. Or hours of cutting, and that would be.
you can address it then on the spot.
I can tell you, if it is, Scenic Hudson or another really reputable conservation group, they monitor everything on a yearly basis. So they'll be checking the property every year, make sure that there's nothing that conflicts with their permitting.
But that would be something the residents could bring to the to zoning and say, hey, listen, these trees are dead now that they planted, and they could address it that way. Okay.
Yeah, and also it'll be, I just wrote down too, we'll make that a condition.
What was that last one?
Let's make it a condition of special permit in terms of if anything does die.
Yeah, no, I'm doing that, yeah.
Okay. Replanted.
So does anyone have any more questions about the conditions?
Well, George you want to describe your conditions, George?
Sure, well, maybe there were conditions as much as they were just the, site plan requirements. So just looking through to make sure that everything fully complied. They did have a survey. I know I've seen the survey. We've all seen it, but it just wasn't part of the set. So it was one of the comments that is required. So, and they have it and they're going to include it in the final drawing set. So it's all in one place, right? I had a recommendation on the screening. That's a sequencing thing that goes in first prior to the panels. So that again, the idea is the screening's there to protect you from seeing. So let's get the screening up and then do the panels. Put the best foot forward, right? And again, they've agreed to all of this. There's no arguments. So again, one of the other site plan requirements spoke about preparing, a plan illustrating the habitats identified by the significant habitats map and prepared by Hudsonia for the town of Pine Plains. So they've agreed to do that. Again, that's just a requirement in the code. Another requirement requires steep slopes and rock outcrops to be shown. I know we did see illustrations of it. They did realign their panels, but that actual drawing didn't make it into the actual final site plan. So again, it's just a comment that needs to be in there, and they've agreed to it. For the commissioning plan, I had, question just to make sure that how far, how annually or biannually or when's it updated, and that we're not taking credit for possible recycle sales. And again, that's all in there, and again, no issues being taken with it. I recommended that the operation and maintenance plan originally submitted be reviewed by the board for compliance with the current proposal about pesticides being used, for instance. Is that in the O&M now? Just making sure it's there. Again, it's all there. Some of the stuff overlaps with what Frank and Warren were talking about. Specific criteria for inspecting, replacing proposed screening. Again, was a question that I had just to make sure that's in the operation and maintenance plan and it's in there. Specific criteria for replacing or any existing vegetation, right? Because there's existing vegetation that provides screening. So what happens if that microburst knocks it down?
Yeah.
Now there's minor path to your solar farms, right? The existing vegetation on site permanently conserved in a conservation units in the pipeline. So again, that's in there, that's under their control. So again, if that were to happen, if a hurricane came through, a microburst, a tornado, right, something of that nature, it is subject to that easement, just again, so everyone knows. So I don't know if that even requires replanting, allows replanting, does it have to go back and naturally go through a process to reestablish itself? Again, conditions, criteria.
But I mean, even if those trees, those are big trees, right? Even if they got knocked down, if it's replanted, it's gonna be like 30 years or 4 years before
But
they're
again,
gonna be
there's
near the
legal element of reasonableness. It's not really practical or reasonable to plant an 85-foot tall tree,
right.
let alone a whole forest up. But it is reasonable to say it needs to be replanted, not left to reseed itself, and that'll take 200 years. You know what I mean?
So how could we
Solar
ever?
panels will be down.
And so what they said.
If anyone,
Sorry, well, you finish and then we'll.
if the board, deems that that's something that needs to be addressed, that's just, the reason bringing it up. And then again, as already indicated, any and all permits from involved and interested agencies need to be in place, which it's already been.
I can probably, I have to think about it a bit, put a condition in special use permit conditions that if there is a catastrophic event that destroys all or a portion of the natural screening in addition to the planting, that the applicant would be required to reapply to the planning board for alternative mitigation of that in there. But you're right, you can't.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, yeah.
That's
Yeah, that's just, it's not really possible. And along with the mature trees, I did want to give some to the board. Just because I know there was more than once that this has come up about this old growth and mature forest, and those
Require it.
terms are used synonymously.
Like, the 1 foot.
Well,
You
Could
can-
require
You
some-
can require like a 3-inch or 3.5-inch caliber.
Yeah.
It's gonna be 12. It's gonna be 8 to 12
Sure.
feet.
But this comment that keeps coming up, that we keep hearing about mature forests and cutting down and whatnot. So there is an actual legal definition for mature forest, old growth forest. There's very, very little of that in New York. I mean, those are forests that have to be left alone and natural. No logging, no interaction for like, 150 to 200 years. And just, here's a map for what it's worth. See the green? These are spots that are probably old growth. So there's a little bit in the Catskills. There's fairly little really throughout the Adirondacks. There's nothing in our area. This is a 1936 photo from Dutchess County. This is 2014. So this is the area that we're going in, right? We were all out here looking for wetlands and things. You can see this. You can see how much of it was actually in 1936 all cleared. So this was cleared in 36. It's grown up since then. It's not an old growth forest. It's not a mature, what would be biologically considered old growth or mature forests.
And those are all trees. Always.
And this was all gone too.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah, and
So
this,
these trees
this
have
whole
grown
thing
up.
here, this.
Yeah,
is
this
not
was all
gonna-
gone. So even up front, it was bigger. It extended back further. This extended up. So since then, the trees have grown down towards this field. They've grown up through here. This whole thing was open. So just
Wow,
so everyone's aware, again, you have taken a very hard look at it, and we didn't ignore old growth, mature forests.
Mhm.
That's not what's being proposed. Taken, and the DEC has reviewed it. Fish and Wildlife reviewed it, and specifically, that's important, specifically for bats as well. So that's why they reached the conclusions they reached. This is not mature.
right, and if they, when they did their review. If they don't specifically mention something, it means that.
Right, they don't, it's like proving a negative, right? They're not gonna say everything that it isn't. They're just gonna say what it is. So if it was going to result in old growth take, they would have said, hey, we've got an old growth forest here. It's not an old growth forest. New York is one of the few states that actually defines legally what an old growth or mature forest is. It is a neg. So like I said, it's got to be 150, 200 years minimum. One of the first criteria, if you're trying to have an area, recognized as old growth, has it been logged? Because again, it requires nature to come up. They actually go in there and you look at not only the size of trees, because it's not just big trees, but everything else that goes with an undisturbed, wild, old growth forest, right? You have a lot of decaying trees. You have areas of succession. It's a complicated, analysis to go through, and they literally do count dead trees, which is why, logging is a bad thing, because you do take the bigger trees out. You clear things, people who manage their forests. That's not a mature old growth forest, even though you might have a 200-year-old stand of trees, because you keep cutting everything and cleaning everything out from under it, making it this nice thing to walk through or ride your horse through. Well, you just ruined it essentially from an old growth standpoint. The different biodiversity that would have set itself up isn't there. So it's more than just old trees, even though these aren't even to that age. And you would need, minimum acreages of them as well. So long story short, just so you guys can rest assured, because I know it's come up a few times in different,
Sure.
we didn't ignore it. It's just not there.
If you interested, most villages, small, the municipalities such as a village, do have tree laws where they protect certain heritage trees and valuable trees. In fact, Rhinebeck, Village of Rhinebeck has one. It's unusual to have such a law for a town. It's very hard, but in the villages, they especially the village like Rhinebeck, where there are a lot of beautiful trees, they do protect certain trees from cutting down. So if you look at the law, you can get an idea of the different qualities of trees.
That being said, go ahead, Michael.
No, go ahead, take each.
And that being said, taking 26 acres of trees does impact the natural environment, the natural environmental features of this site. And regardless of, these are not old growth trees. If they weren't cut, they might someday be old growth trees. Is there any feeling on the board that we should take some mitigation to see that trees are planted either on other places on this acreage or other places in the town, so that over the next 25 years, 26 acres of trees are recovered or some number? I mean, the applicant might say, well, it might be cheaper for us to reduce the size of this project by 4,000 solar panels and not cut down, 3 acres of that, but just that kind of trade-off. I mean, we have agreed that the taking of all this 26 acres is not overwhelmingly disastrous to the environment. There were no trees there 50 years ago. That's fine. But the opposition to this project, there are some who just seem to not want it just because it's in their neighborhood. But I think there's another group of people who are really disturbed by the number of trees being taken down in that area. And it might be an opening for us to ask the applicant who's funding this project to either commit to finding places in town to plant trees or funding a foundation that would oversee planting of trees in Pine Plains over the next 25 years, so that every year we have money to plant trees. As a gesture. I mean, it's going to cut their profits, but I'm sure it will not eliminate their profits. And I'm just trying to come up with some way that we can show the people who are concerned about this that we have concerns about it too, and that maybe there's something we can do to certainly. I wouldn't expect the neighbors who hired Mr. Lyons and all that to be swayed by this action, but I think that it is a gesture to the community that we can make to show that we're listening.
I have a question, even though I'm not in the vote on this. If I was a farmer and I wanted to clear more acreage for planting crop, would I have to get a special use permit? Would I have to plant more trees to replace the ones I took down to increase my field production?
No.
You wouldn't have to do that.
No.
It wouldn't have to do that. It needs to.
No.
But even outside of the ag laws, if the current owner wanted to clear cut the entire property,
Right.
not under the ag law, they could do that.
Plant a
Right.
lawn, to put a lawn in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
You can't grow turf.
Okay. That's all the purpose for the question.
Which is right,
Andrew, you want to?
it's going on here all the time.
I was gonna say this, the applicant just heard this, so
He wants to.
he can respond.
Yeah, we've been, listening to the concerns from the planning board and from the neighbors for the better part of the last year. And I think, what I think we all lose sight of is that the conservation easement is tremendous and it's completely donated. There's lots of people who have conservations in Pine Plains, and I'm sure they'll tell you that usually there's a monetary compensation that's associated with putting this restriction on the property. And we've agreed to see absolutely no compensation for putting the deed restriction on the property. And further, that includes the permanent conservation of 70 acres. So we've acknowledged, and we talked about this in Seeker, that there is an impact to removing 26 acres of trees on site, but the mitigation that we see that goes above and beyond is the permanent conservation and protection of 70 acres. And 70 acres that are highly visible, or the 26 acres that are being removed are not visible or much less visible than what is being protected along the ridgeline and the lower portions of the property. So I appreciate the sentiment. I think we've already gone quite far to acknowledge the concerns for the tree removal and, you know, the protection of the visual aesthetic for this property, which is in a highly visible part of town. And we think that the mitigation that we voluntarily offered is really sufficient.
What about the funds from you guys are gonna donate some funds from whatever logging, right? Wasn't that a
Yeah,
thing?
we've agreed to see no monetary.
And was there any estimate from your forester of what that funds, or we don't
I
know?
think we did provide with the. Yeah.
11,000?
It was quite a lot less than what it would cost to remove the trees.
Right, but then that would go to the town,
Yes, yes.
and the town could use that as at least a seed to. Pardon the pun, but
That was well played.
to start like some sort of tree fund and be able to, I don't know how much it costs to plant an acre of trees, small saplings or.
That's how big they are.
Right.
Uh,
Get trees for free if you want like that.
Well, it should even be, replacing some that are, not like streetscape.
Right. And again, to echo what Warren was saying, the law in Rhinebeck is pretty well written and it does allow for collecting fees. Because you really can't mitigate and plant the trees. I mean, the whole reason why an applicant is taking them down is because they're building something. And usually it's not on 170 acres where you say, well, plant some over here, right? So it does allow for the collecting of fees by the town, and then the town has that in a marked fund. It can't be run specifically for planting trees, and then the town comes up with where those trees go. If there's a certain street that needs streetscaping, or you want to add something around a park or the town hall or whatever, wherever the town takes a liking to planting. So that is an option, again, not in this specific instance, but for moving forward, maybe the board wants to recommend and go to the town board, and I'm sure Frank and Warren can figure out how to mimic that law for Pine Plains where you guys would be able to.
Yeah, I think the town board will be looking at something
Yeah.
along that
We
line.
are gonna be looking at that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because again, it's not really equitable and fair to just pick on one applicant. Trees are important, right? Period. Not just when there's a solar farm in play. So if trees are being removed or taken down, and they are deemed an important resource, then, again, this allows this vehicle so that monies can be put into this fund.
and I think I did question the applicant at the time. We talked about like what places on the property were available. And the only place was the spot that's, I guess you guys designated as a possible homestead site, is the only real open, that's not a cornfield. That's not being farmed. So until, like you were suggesting before, someone stops farming it, like, there's not much on the site itself.
The donation part of your forestry plan, is that the commitment in the plan? I don't remember.
It is, yeah, it's a copy of it.
Okay.
Ready.
Yeah, we're gonna have
The town board could, there's a town board issue, I guess, but the town board could take those funds to
Yeah,
tree planting.
well, we can use the funds for whatever we want.
Yeah.
Well, say for instance, if you found someone with a conservation easement already has some land in a conservation easement, maybe they say, oh, we'll give this acre you can plant on it, and then maybe the town can pay for the planting.
So talking about the easements, and the argument keeps coming up that it's set a precedent, or what, if more fields will go up near the Central Hudson substation. But it seems like most everything around it is already under conservation, so how far away is near a substation to hook up to it?
It doesn't quite work whenever someone comes in to do a project like this, right, they're putting extra power into the grid that's not currently there. So the utility runs an analysis on their system, and then any upgrades that are required to accept this, the applicant has to pay for it. So, all right, so Carson Power comes in and puts these projects in place, and they have to pay for whatever upgrades to do this. And if someone else was to come in and try and get on the same feeder and try and get into that substation, they're going to have to upgrade it that much more, which is typically cost prohibitive in my experience. because of how much money you need to put in to upgrade the system. Because usually the second one in has to upgrade the substation. And that's, I mean, none of it is cheap, but that's really.
What about any distance from that hosting capacity line through there? I mean, it's not realistic.
It gets very expensive.
Like where, at what distance, you know?
Carson provided a map of that
Right,
very early on,
right, very early on.
up
But
Prospect Hill Road extension. down-
Yeah, maybe Andrew, you can answer that. Like at what distance from the hosting capacity becomes cost prohibitive?
Pass this on, we're gonna take a look at it. So that's dated, but essentially that's the three-phase network and time planes, and the blue lines are what would be attractive to host a solar facility. So the reality is there's extremely limited capacity in pine planes for additional solar generation.
you would have to pay for
And
the
it close.
capacity to be increased. You'd have, you know, as a solar, as long as you mean somewhere where the capacity isn't there, you pay for it.
Yeah, blue means there's.
In this map,
Kate was saying that just because there's so many other conservation easements around it,
I mean, that.
you know, you're coming from, you know, a half a mile away otherwise. To try to get into it.
It's like the
Right now,
reality
the
is.
state could almost change their mind, decide they're gonna fund it, and then that.
No, those are all properties that have
Equation, you never know.
compared to the conservation map, you'd see majority.
Yeah, sir. Can I keep this? Little sheet. Thanks. Everybody want to see this? Well,
Yeah.
That was
to be at the long.
Exactly, seeing what's a conservation.
With their submissions.
Might board want to look.
You're welcome.
I remember looking at it before.
Your question on
Like there's
precedent,
nothing in
and
it.
that came, you know, the last night.
But it is.
There's several things on precedent. That is what you mentioned yourself as a board, and that is, there's a lot of other conservation easements already in place around here. There's the cost, as George mentioned, and there's the actual locational maps, which just looking at now, it's not easy to put this in another place. But I would add a fourth thing, which I don't know enough about, Warren, because I have not been at any town board meetings, but I understand the town board has got a moratorium on any other
Right.
solar, and they're
Yeah,
looking
for
at
8 months.
how to tighten up or
Yeah.
But there's really
On the
only
law
two
better.
studies, which he's part of the, and Sugar.
and this is just the DLC. I actually have the county. They made a map for us. That I want to use in the ZRC process. And with all the land conservancies, at least what they've heard from, you know, they said there could even be more out there that they don't know about. And they made this map, this comprehensive map with, it was actually Kate's idea. And they also put up, what did they put, the federal wetlands on there also. And then once you look at that map, and then you look at the hosting capacity, you combine the two maps, there's very little land left in that area for further projects. So we'll look at that with the town board and the ZRC, and as for, you know, as far as looking at the law. Yeah.
By the way, I don't want to add on to this meeting too long, but one final thing might be good to do, and that is now that we discuss the conditions and we've added on to some conditions, discuss these issues. It might be good to go back, if you don't mind, I could highlight the.
Yeah, don't go through that.
Don't go through. But I just wanted to mention that 11. The way the special permit set up in the state law when we began the meeting is the state law says, okay, here's the special permit. And here's what it is. It's a permitted use in the area, but we now have to look at it depending on the objectives of your town laws. And those 11 we put in the front of our memo. Now that we address the conditions, the purpose of the conditions are also to make sure that the 11 objectives in your mind can be met. So I don't know if we all, you know, that's, we again have that memo that it's dated September 7th. I'm not going to go through it. Yeah, but I just want to remind you that, you know, the item 1 there, the proposed use should be deemed compatible with adjoining properties with the natural and built environment. We went over this, the board spent a lot of time on this and included on that it was not to add to this impact if following, if the conditions were done, and, the applicant agreed to things, and I think, so on that basis, we think that the line warning can be met. But the second objective is on easier. One side is accessible fire police. You've got letters and sign offs from the fire department. The third one is just special use is citable to site consideration of scale and intensity in relation to the environmental features. You've got letters from DEC, from Fish and Wildlife on that. The fourth one, adequate screening, separation distances. Talked about that and conservation easement that they're going to do. The fifth one is the use will not impact ambient noise levels, dust, odors, that's and glare. That's all been going over. There's conditions on the glare. There's conditions on operations. The sixth is parking demand, which there is not. I think the sixth is met. It's self-evident. The seven is vehicular and pedestrian bicycle circuit. You know, again, this is what written. When these general conditions were written, wasn't written with a typically solar out there. You know, if you had a restaurant here, this would be an issue. So, and then 8 is location, range, and size and design of the special use, including all principal accessory structures. So it's compatible with the neighborhood in which it is situated. I think again, that was a secret, a big secret issue that you spent time on. And we think visibility aesthetics is part of that. And given that it's not readily seen, it won't be readily seen in all those visuals that you did. We think that can help meet this and that's a condition now that we've recommended to the special permit. And then 9 is utility, stormwater, water supply. I think here, snow removal, that kind of thing is all easily met here. And then 10 is we shall not impact the character of the town, neighborhood, or values of surrounding property. We found in other cases that we've done a number of these. It depends on the specifics of something, whether it involves surrounding property values. We found studies that show it might have a minor impact. In other studies, it shows an increase in property values. Others are completely inconclusive. It depends on the specifics of the site and your judgment on this site. And then finally, 11 is specific use shall not impact historic, scenic, natural, environmental issues on site in an adjacent neighborhood. So we think that again, with the conditions you've now gone over and added a couple, that these objectives could be met. But it's just a matter of your judgment on those 11 objectives in your code. And then we've got now about 20 conditions. It's up to you if there's anything else that you want to put in here. So.
George, remind me on the steep slopes, because it's mentioned in your memo and it's just about delineating them, but they're not really building on the slopes, right? Are they?
No, they actually did delineate them already. We saw a map on it, but it is in the site plan requirements that it's in there. So that's why I was just saying we need to have that added.
Or they actually
They actually moved panels off us.
Right, that's what I
Smaller
thought.
areas that were steeper. If you remember
So-
when they reconfigured a little bit, that was why, because of the exposure up in some steep areas.
So there might be some still on some steep areas or
I
not?
think they moved them all,
All,
if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And the exposed bedrock, there's like 20 gaps, was the only site change.
Right, originally it was all neat rows going across and they kind of cut these little carve-outs and.
and Kate, you had about that plan. Are you comfortable with what Warren was suggesting as far as the language is the tree replacement plan? If he had general language, they would have to come back to us for the planning board and present some sort of plan to mitigate some sort of catastrophic damage, etc. And then whatever planning board can decide how tall and how,
So you don't think it should be in there something about size?
or do you think?
Or
I
say
mean,
just
in
come
normal
back to the
site,
thing.
I just
It was here.
I
wasn't it?
refer to George too. Our landscape people in our office would normally recommend, 3-inch to 3.5-inch caliber trees. I once tried with our landscape people, why can't we get a bigger tree, 4-inch or 5-inch? By the way, this is the circumference of the tree at 4.5 foot height off the ground. But that tree, that kind of 3.5 inch caliber tree is up there. It's, 8 to 12 feet or so. I mean, you'd be a better judge of that, George. But what I asked our landscape architect, wait a minute, this is, you put in 6 inch caliber trees, they're giant, they're very expensive, and they're not gonna, he said, let me phrase this right, their likelihood of taking in our ground and actually succeeding as is in growing trees greater at the 3.5 inch caliber. Now, I'm not a landscaper, I rely on my landscape people, but that's what they said to me, and that's why we usually specify.
So you would think it would specify in the condition?
I think you can, I mean.
What do you, or
Yeah.
to specify a process?
Or we just keep it consistent with the other screening trees that they're putting in initially? In other words, were they 6 to 12?
Are you talking about in the event of a catastrophe?
Correct.
I think the language would be that they have to come back to the board and then you make a determination. I mean, if 1 acre burnt down and then included an area that provided a screening to the facility, that would be different than if 20 acres of trees came down. So
Or, so you're saying then they could decide whether we thought it was important to put trees there or not?
you could decide in that event, and that's not atypical. So I think that's to try to anticipate it before.
It's hard to figure out every contingency that's gonna happen. Andrew, you had a comment?
Yeah, so I think that this is not something we haven't seen before, so I just want to apply the 70 forested acres that will be protected, right? And there's probably only very little of that that's actually providing screening to the solar project, and that's what's up on the hill. So I think maybe Warren Frank, we can pull some language from another solar project and propose something that might make sense. I think what we would suggest is if there's an event that knocks down trees, existing trees that are providing a screening benefit, that open, let's say, a gap where now there's visibility, we would plant additional trees along the perimeter of the fence, similar to what we're proposing in other areas of the site to, screen. I think we could propose something.
You want to send that to me?
Yeah, that might make more sense to add to the site plans as well.
That's the right here, but I don't.
Send it to three.
Yeah, so we'll send that back to you, included as a condition to add to the site plans or as a condition. That's one.
I agree with Warren. They should come back to the planning board because if it burns down from a brush fire or we have a tornado, the damage is going to be very different and we can't anticipate what's going to happen 15 or 20 years out.
Hopefully it won't happen.
Frank, you had some verbiage in this memo, item number 4 about the adequate screening and separation distances are provided to buffer the use from adjoining properties. And on the top of page 3, about the applicant submitting a revised plan that grants the proposed plantings from a single row of 6-foot plantings to a double row of 12-foot plantings. So when you were talking such trees.
Yeah, they increased them to get
Right.
better, mitigation from the visual when they were doing the visual impacts at it.
So the 12-foot high tree,
Like
that-
forwards to those.
That's,
But that's-
I know,
that could be a screen.
So that's just on the southeast,
right.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, these conditions that, this analysis, Frank.
Yeah.
Put together is consistent with the findings that we made on the super. Nothing new.
Right.
I have one question, Frank, on your list of conditions, number 16.
16, no.
They must apply and receive a commercial access highway work permit from New York DOT. One of the first things I mentioned with this site is if they're working anywhere on 199, they should probably have appropriate flaggers and signage. And
Maintenance and protection of trail.
George is paid to do this clearly.
No, we didn't say
Is
that.
that included in
That's included in the commercial.
the commercial? There we go. That was
You
good.
must not get that permit without a maintenance protection trail. Go through
That's
DOT,
standard, but I can put a language in there that.
they'll send that directly to the
covers
traffic
appropriate
safety division.
safety.
Yeah.
Yeah, maintenance of traffic.
Get the
I figured it was, but I didn't have
They
to
have
look it up.
specialists who will tell you you've spaced your. They never follow it themselves, just when they do their projects. The worst offenders. But They make us private people, right?
Michael, I had one more.
Yeah, everyone,
Just,
come on, everyone's.
I think it's in the operation maintenance about mowing 4 times a year.
Yeah, I would like to go over that whole section
Yeah.
again, really read that again.
Yeah, I mean, just because I asked that you include milkweed in the mix of plants. But if you mow milkweed down, it kind of defeats the use of having milkweed. Because
You don't want to mow it down.
the caterpillars aren't so big until, like.
Well,
August.
somebody's,
So there's gonna be some understanding of what,
Yeah, is there a certain time when?
and mowing once a year is probably enough. So mow it in the fall.
Would you know,
Infrequently is the.
with the sheep?
It's only when the. Panel gets so high that it's causing shading impact
Yeah,
in the panels.
Yeah, I think if you plant the right stuff, that won't be a problem at all. Yeah, then once a year will be.
We were talking about that. Do we need that as a condition of pollinator friendly stuff planted and everything?
That's
our- that is a condition.
That is, but I mean, then
Yes, we have to.
there should be some control over when it's mowed. It's not mowed, so.
Well, yeah, you want the pollinators there.
Is
you
the
want the flowers.
agricultural expert have to have that expertise?
Well, we can, I mean, again, we can put language in there. Obviously, the whole point of having the native pollinators was so the flowers are there, so you don't want to cut them
Yeah.
before the
right,
bees have the
right.
benefit. Similar with the milkweed specifically for the
Just
butterflies.
so there's an understanding if that's.
What, is there a specific time for the butterflies?
Yeah, oh, for sure.
Which
Yeah,
is,
so
you
we
know,
could-
or, you know,
We
yeah,
can
gotta
put it
look
in
that
there.
up.
I
Okay.
mean, they are, again, a concern. They aren't on the list. So again, it was a voluntary mitigating practice that they say, well, we hear you. It is a thing and we can assist that specific insect by planting that.
So there's some sort of language can be added to.
Sure.
Can
I
you
can,
send me
I can
some-
look it up. And
Some
send it to you.
samples on that?
Yep, absolutely.
For both the pollination and the,
For sure.
just to be clear.
Yeah.
The other thing nobody's brought up, and to do a hard pivot off of environmental stuff, is property value. I brought that up early on.
We just talked about.
Frank just went.
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
Did you?
We have done a little
Mhm.
research.
I came in 15 minutes. late,
Oh,
so my
yeah.
apologies.
We've done a little bit of research on it and what we found. And by the way, this is not, the end all of things, but Sarah Eagle in our office, one of my partners did research because we saw this in the special permit, objectives. And she's looked at Massachusetts studies, some New York State studies, some studies out in the Midwest. Because this is fairly new, solar farms, there's not a history of this, of 20 years of studies, but the Massachusetts study and New Jersey study and New York State study, she's looking at them. And it is so dependent on the type of solar farm that these studies tend to be a little bit inconclusive. 1 or 2 of them show property value decrease from 1% to 3%. A couple of others show property value increase, slight increase, which may have to do with real estate market issues in that area.
Yeah, I mean, that many studies is really hard to get rid of confounding factors.
Yeah, it's a little hard to determine,
Apples to apples.
but in general, they're not showing a wide range. In other words, they're not showing a wide decrease in values. They're not showing any significant, there's 2 or 3% increases. They tend to be a little inconclusive, and I think our best thought on it is because we're familiar. We're working on a few solar farms now, and we represent Riverhead, which it's out in the east end of Long Island. For whatever reason, they have 5 or 6 different solar farms. 1 or 2 of them are fairly large. Riverhead again is different than Pine Plains. So where they've got one that went in. Yeah. Yeah, be happy you're not, I shouldn't. Anyway, in Riverhead though, things are flatter. And so property values around 1. What they did was they did the setback from the road was, I think about 50 feet, giving them room to slightly put a berm in. And then they put heavy landscaping on the berm. So as you drive by, you see all the vegetation in the forefront and then the solar panels are in the back. That's a well done one. for them, because they have a flat terrain. You're different here. You don't have a flat terrain, you have a rolling, terrain and farms. It's a little bit different, but it's the combination of visibility of those farms. And out there, they've got one or two that are visible. And that can have, a greater impact. And the new ones they've just done, we're writing some solar controls for them. The new ones that have been done, they have been much more, the real estate community was telling, saying, this is the way to do them. And the real estate agents said, we don't think these are going to affect property values, but it's very site specific in how they're done. But the studies are kind of just, they're new and they're not entirely conclusive, I would say. Here, you've got to be a judge of that where, you've done all those visual studies. And I found the Saratoga Associates presentation pretty thorough in terms of, I'm not saying nothing will be seen, but it's not going to be an in-your-face type of thing that would have a greater impact on property values. If we've seen one or two in Long Island that have not been done well, and I think this one, you've really spent a lot of time on this, and I think as a result, you've got distance between actually the Saratoga Associate did. Anybody who wanted, an examination from their house or their back porch. And usually the critical one is from the public ways, the public roads. And here it looks like from those visibility studies that you've mitigated that quite a bit.
Does it seem like the only consideration to the assessors will be visual impact and not just sheer proximity to said property? Even if somebody that lives right in the center of, say McGee's, that are right in Pulver's Corners, will not be able to see this project at all.
Right.
But there's no setting aside that they are very close to it. Is that a consideration into property value, into their property value? Probably not.
Yeah, we haven't seen, again, I don't want to give you a definitive.
Every article I've read backs you up. It says it's a net zero loss because if you can't see it, then they're not taking it by value.
What
But
we're looking at in other places is, I'm not dismissing proximity, because proximity can be an issue, particularly if that solar farm is not buffered by some vegetation and distance. But here, it does seem to me that it is the distance of those solar farms from the nearest property is significant. In Long Island, what we're faced with is some of these proposals are, probably 200 feet from some residential neighborhoods. That's a little different than here. So the studies are a little bit, I have to say that I think they're inconclusive right now, and they depend very much on the specifics of the site. But in general, the type of swing in value that we're seeing in like the Massachusetts study, the New Jersey study is about 1 to 3% effect on property values. But I hesitate to, because I think it does depend on the exact situation. And I think, by the way, that's an issue with, that's one of the beauties of a special permit. And someone said the last meeting, well, can't just assume that it goes any place in this zone. You got to test what is the location. What is the location like? And that's correct. And I think that's what you've been doing here. Is this location far enough away from adjacent properties, and how visible is it? And it appears that it's not particularly visible.
And the first thing we did in December was walk. Were you there? I can't remember even though you weren't there. A lot of us walked the tree line where they were going to cut to. Walked the whole perimeter of the whole project in leaf walk conditions, December 10th, 11th.
Yeah. I've got, we've got another application, for instance, in another village. It happens to be in northern Westchester, and there we've got, it's not in Westchester, and very, very detailed review of it. But I can tell you, it's the reason for that is the studies that we're seeing, it's more visible than this is. Or that the studies have shown this is not particularly visible. I'm not saying it's invisible, but it's not going to be if the studies are correct. I think they're correct. Saratoga is very, I mean, we know it fairly well. Well, think it for, yeah, we think that their analysis is fairly solid. So I sense that if there's, I don't want to, they're not crazy, they're not, but again, our experience has been that these are minor impacts, but there's still impacts depending on a site. And I sense that this one, compared to our Long Island experience, flat land too close to a neighborhood, not properly, buffered and big firms, that type of thing. And they're doing that now. Riverhead is really, doing a much better job.
While we're on the property values, how about with the conservation easement? How does that affect surrounding property values? It has to have some sort of effect, no?
The conservation easements are tricky. I've actually litigated that issue about the impact they have on property values. They went up to the appellate division, and it's the property owner in that case argued that they self-imposed a conservation easement on their property, mandated that the assessor decrease the assessed value of the property. And we argued, I was representing a town, that it was on a case-by-case basis, and it was discretionary on the part of the assessor as to what impact the conservation easement had. It's not mandatory. And we won the case, and we won it at the appellate division. And the truth is that in some cases it increases the value of the property. It's again inconclusive.
But you're talking about the property.
I was curious about the surrounding property.
Oh, surrounding
Yeah,
increases value. For sure. If you live near a property or adjacent to a property that has a conservation easement, then you're pretty well assured that there's not going to be a 100-lot subdivision on that. So
Right.
it helps increase your saleability of your property. For sure.
Andrew had something?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that exactly. I said earlier, it's a highly visible property. If you drive on Big River or 99, you look up, you're going to see this property, but you're only going to see the portions that are not going to be developed for the solar facility. So we're conserving that entire property, right? We're going farther to protect the bucolic rural aesthetic that you get in Pine Plains when you drive on public roads adjacent to the property. It's never going to be a 100-lot subdivision. It'll never be a golf course or a commercial facility or a dump or a parking lot, or the landowner will never, be angry and go clear cut the whole property. They won't be allowed to under the conservation easement.
And the conservation easement is for both parcels, not just where the solar panels are gonna be?
Entire property with an overlay where the solar is, where that in that overlay and only that overlay, just this solar project will be a permitted use. And when this solar project reaches the end of life, let's say it's 25, 35 years from now, and it's decommissioned, then it would be fully conserved as of the rest of the property. When the solar is installed as a temporary use, it can be easily completely removed, and the ground underneath will be completely viable for agriculture or forested, whatever.
So then what's used to determine when it should be decommissioned?
So the project on the 25-year minimum life, that's more or less the contract we agree to with the state as an energy generator. After that, it could be, the panels, they have a 15 to 25-year warranty. They might be replaced, and it says in the contract continues to be a power generator, or maybe, 40 years from now, everything's on nuclear. There's not a need for it. It's not economical, and it's just the decision's made to just decommission it and move on.
Yeah, if you remember, I said from the beginning, I think we should look at this, that it's gonna be there forever. And have a bonus that it could be decommissioned in return, because just looking how the state is now, the energy needs, and then, what they're gonna be asking for more and more of this, and then, but unless something like we somehow turn to nukes, somehow, or something else comes up.
Or hydropower from Cape. There's a big,
Hmm.
that's a very big project right now that's working on. And that hydropower, it's behind and over budget as for the wind turbines out, off Montauk. But if those come through, you're gonna have other sources of power also.
But so whatever that calculation is done at the policy, state level, federal level. Who knows, in 25 or 35 years, what they're gonna, which way it's gonna go. And again, like. This just brings up that stuff that's all. Out of our. Pay grade, but I mean, what you're talking about isn't, that
Yeah,
is
right.
about the decommissioning and all that. But as far as like what the policy is gonna mean for the country and for the state. It's up to them, the state and the feds, and we're just dealing with zoning. But did you have a concern?
No, just about, is it after 30 years, it will definitely be decommissioned, or
I don't know.
after 40 years, or
So there's no definite end.
no end, but at least 25 years, you're guaranteed to be able to use it for.
Right.
For sure, I left some extra copies, if anybody wants them.
Does anyone else have any questions or more conditions or? Steve, you okay with it? All right, so,
Take a straw vote, giving me the authority to go ahead and draft a resolution approving the special permit and site plan with those conditions and such other conditions that we add to it. And then you would take a formal vote after I prepare the resolution
we'd also have we have to have our public hearing right at the next
after
meeting.
the public hearing.
Right.
This way I can.
Yeah, to get
I can
working
start
on it.
working.
You can get working on. So,
I mean, our minds may be changed at the public hearing, something may happen at the public hearing.
No.
But until you actually vote on the resolution, it's not binding, but I need to. If you want me to start work on it, I need to get a sense of how the board is viewing this.
so I have to take an official vote for this, or just, do we just speak up? Have him,
Can I ask a question?
oh, yes, absolutely.
Would it not be more prudent just to hold off on that until after the public hearing entirely? I'm
Well,
trying
then
to
I
figure
won't-
what's the advantage of,
Only if you wanted a resolution ready by what is the date of the 11th or what is?
Oh, I didn't anticipate, I mean, we're not gonna,
So.
we want to hear what the public has to say, but I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to just be able.
yeah,
Okay, so why don't we just wait and I won't prepare anything for the next meeting with
yeah.
the understanding
That's
that
better.
we close the public hearing, then we'll do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
But it may not be for several months if not, I mean. it might-
It'll be,
yeah, I'm waiting.
So, I mean, please go back to July.
but your next meeting's October 11th.
That's, so I won't have anything prepared, but we'll be thinking, in the meantime, if you want to.
Well, can we-
You think of something?
Well, can we at least have a list of the conditions as gone over tonight? That we can look at, maybe not a formal resolution, having a memo with, like how Frank did,
Sort of
with the
recapping
amended,
this?
the list of conditions as amended. Just so that we make sure that everything that we talked about tonight is incorporated.
Yeah, that,
Yeah,
yeah, based on our discussion tonight, based on the
Frank will
conditions
just
in the
amend the
amendment.
memo.
Right, so not the official resolution, but the amended,
Because bonding. Ordinance.
Yeah.
Ordinances.
Yeah,
right,
Just remember that the list, it's not, I'm not just gonna take the list and put it in.
I
It'll be a little bit more expensive.
understand,
I'll
but
try to get the dates correct.
Yeah.
What's-
The date would be good.
yeah.
That's
important.
so yeah, more of a memo than the official, yeah, but we want to hear what the public has to say.
Any other questions for us while we're here? Can we go home now?
What was the date of the next?
Of the 11th,
Let's make sure I get it here.
Actually, they're asleep, so.
Hey, look at that.
but I have a motion to adjourn the meeting,
A motion?
all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?